Just a couple bad weather fans representing New York, talking all things sports. Man, what could go wrong? We got Alex, who's a fan of the Knicks, and Mike of the Nets. The yin-yang of the tri-state, place your bets on the Yankees, Giants, Mets, or Jets. Yeah, you should listen if they're sparking your interest. If you made a vow to your team, don't break it. Bad weather fans is the relation.
That's right. This is Bad Weather Fans, episode number 179. Mike Biseglia, Alex Benesiewicz. No Alex here with me today, but I do have Nets super fan Corey Cantor. We'll talk to him in just a matter of moments. Don't forget, follow Bad Weather Fans on Twitter, at Nick Central for Alex. I'm at Mike Delivers Pod. We're going to get into some Nets news as the rumors heating up about Tyler Herro and what that means with Ben Simmons, Damian Lillard. And, of course, the New York Knicks. They do sign Dante DiVincenzo, but the big talk we'll get into with the Knicks early will be Obi Toppin. Corey, thanks for coming on Bad Weather Fans. Thanks for being here. Thanks for filling in for Alex. How the hell are you doing?
Oh, I'm doing great, Mike. Long-time listener, first-time guest. Really happy to be here. And it's a good week. Free agency is a lot of fun. I mean, this and the trade deadline are the two most, I think, exciting moments in the NBA.
Yeah, no, I do agree with that. This will be a lot of fun. I would do, if I had to do power rankings of biggest net fans I know on Twitter, you're definitely in the Mount Rushmore, which for Knick fans listening means top 4. You're definitely in the Mount Rushmore of net fans. Credit to you. How did that fandom come where I would say it would rival Mike Biseglia?
Wow, well, at first there's like 50 of us, right? Maybe even 100 if you go to Barclays.
Oh, stop with that bullshit. I'm so sick of that fucking thing. But go ahead.
So I've been a net fan since 2000, 2001. So we weren't like really as a family a strong allegiance to any particular team. Hitting Jason Kidd and watching all those games and going to Continental Airlines Arena, seeing Whammy back in the olden days and just the original run, RJ into Vince Carter, and going through some pretty tough times with the 12 and 70 Nets while I was in college, and the last couple of years in Brooklyn with the ups and downs of the superstar team. I don't know. What I love about the Nets is even though there is a lot of failure and challenges, it's always exciting and a lot of good, passionate fans.
Have you listened to the Nets podcast on iHeart about the 01, 02, 02, 03 Nets?
No, it's on my list of things to listen to.
It's excellent. It's a narrative podcast, so it's storytelling with great former Nets, and I highly recommend it for any Knick fan too that just wants to learn about which was the 2 best years in Nets history, NBA wise. It's phenomenal, Corey. You'll love it. You really should listen to it.
That team, and not to go too, we're focusing on the now, but when you compare the recent Nets drama to that team, man, that team was just awesome, just from the top down leadership wise. And to this day, I think since Kidd left, there hasn't been another point guard on the Nets that has gone completely well. I mean, really good players in terms of Kyrie's skill, but since Kidd's mastery of the floor and just leadership on the team, rivaled.
No, nothing like it. To take a team from 26 to 52 wins, get to the NBA Finals. You don't see that. It's a very, in this day and age, think of a team that had 26 wins this past season and then said they're going to be top in the East and make the finals. I mean, it doesn't happen. I mean, it doesn't happen.
And even the kind of GM at that time, Rod Thorne, making a big trade, and we'll be talking about, deals later, but just have the cojones to trade Stephon Marbury, who was a star at that point, for someone who was a bit of a risk. It wasn't like a short thing going for Jason Kidd, but drafting the right way and really having the final piece to that puzzle to turn that team around.
Yeah, trading for a guard that's 6 years older, right? Or whatever it was, 23 to 29. That's a little kid was just entering the prime of his career, but you're giving up on a guy that's 23, 24, an all-star who had a great all-star game in that classic game with Allen Iverson. And, they definitely a risk that was worth taking. Let's talk about a trade with a risk worth taking. Obi Toppin being dealt to the Indiana Pacers. So now you got Obi, former net Bruce, an NBA champion. He didn't win a title with the Nets. Bruce Brown, with a guy that makes $200 million in total contract, and Tyrese Halliburton. I am Corey. I'm not going to lie. And the Knick fans listening to this can say you're a hater. They can say you're an asshole. They can say you're a fucking dick. I don't care. I am so excited and I'm rooting very hard to see Obi Toppin just flourish in Indiana and put together an unbelievable season. Just unbelievable season.
Every single Knick fan, and I did some pre-work before coming on the pod, Mike, for
Nice.
I talked to all my Knick fan, my future brother-in-law, a bunch of close friends. Every single one of them hate the Obi Toppin trade. They're all so nervous that he's going to turn out to be a massive success, because I think it's two of their kind of biggest fears. One is Tibbs. They still don't fully trust him.
Mm-hmm.
And two, the fact that the Knicks just can't land draft picks. And I think that they're, I know, don't want to get Alex mad at me for calling RJ just a very good player who's not a star.
Sure.
But the Knicks haven't really hit on draft picks. And so to see someone like Toppin, who in his minutes have shown really good outside shots, good dunking, good athleticism, to trade him away for 2 second-round picks, which 2 second-round picks nowadays is like Joe Harris went for 2 second-round picks just to dump his salary.
Mm-hmm.
So to trade someone who could be starter level, I mean, I think he'll look good next to Halliburton.
Well, I'm going to defend the Knicks a little bit here. But they have done a decent job with some later picks. I have to give them credit there. In Emmanuel Quickly, in Mitchell Robinson, some of those guys have panned out. But you're right on the sense of those top level lottery picks have not worked out, with Kevin Knox, Frank Ntilikina, or Zingis to an extent, and now, of course, with Obi Toppin. But the frustrating part, as you alluded to, with Obi, isn't that he did not was a bust. It's just an unknown. I mean, it really is a question mark. And my gut says he'll obviously do better in Indiana. I don't think that's a question, because he didn't play for the Knicks. If you don't play, you can't do anything. And that's just a product of reality. If you're not on the court, you're not going to get buckets. You're not going to get stats. He's going to do better in Indiana. I don't know if he's ultimately going to be, a 20-8 guy.
Yeah.
I do know that he fits in the scheme with the Pacers of Halliburton pushing the ball, Obi, Gazelle down the court, alley-oops. Like, it's going to be fun to watch those two together. And there will be moments where Knick fans see Obi have 31-8, and it's going to be painful. I don't know. I mean, Alex brought up this, or Evan brought up this stat a few weeks ago, and he was on the podcast, and then Alex tweeted that it was his original idea or whatever.
Yeah.
Eye roll. But when he plays, he does well. But it's like such a small sample size, it's impossible to know.
It's also strange that they didn't give him as much a chance, even next to Randall, right there. And I don't know if it's how Tibbs thinks, maybe the old school type of coach, where it's like you have your starters and you have your bench. And you even saw this with Quickly, where Quickly had to really gain his trust to eventually start in those big games before he kind of went downhill in, I think, that last round. But Toppin, he didn't even give Toppin a chance to be like, oh, I'll play you with Randall. Because they're not the exact same player, right?
No.
It's not like a Nick Claxton and Ben Simmons where you're like, oh, these guys are hard to play together. Toppin could fit in a lot of different lineups, but ultimately, maybe just like some people have said about Monty Williams, who got fired from Phoenix. Maybe Tibbs is like, if he likes you, you're in his good wheelhouse, and if not, doesn't matter what you do. And so I think Knick fans, 2 second-round picks, they're going to be thinking about this for a while. Not to be too hard on them. I mean, like you said, with Quickly, they're looking pretty good, and with Grimes, who I like a lot, but he could be a legitimate starter in the league in a team like Indiana.
Yeah, and I'd just be so frustrated as a Knicks fan, not knowing that you never got to find out, that you just never got to know. It's more, I think any Knicks fan would tell you they can understand, and even though it was more painful in a lot of ways, but could understand Frank Ntilikina, Kevin Knox, and just say, you know what? We tried. It was a bad draft pick. It didn't work. But the unknown is just so scary with that part of it with Obi Toppin. And I'm not kidding. I will keep an eye on that. Would you say the net equivalent, and it's a little different, would be Cam Thomas of net fans?
Yeah.
If Cam went to, let's say, some other team, there would, I think, for net fans, that same fear of he becomes such a bucket getter that you really screwed up.
Yeah, and I'm wondering what the NBA equivalent is of someone who went to a second team and just does that. I mean, maybe Jalen Brunson is a good example, right? Of the Mavericks, he was good. I mean, Toppin wasn't as good as Brunson was on the Mavericks, but when you go to that next team, you're like, man, we screwed up, right? The Mavs now have paid a lot of money to rectify that mistake. Cam Thomas, I think I'm a little bit less concerned to that issue a little bit later in the draft. And some of those basketball fundamentals, he's had a lot of playing time on the Nets, I think, compared to an Obi Toppin. But net fans do feel as passionately about Cam Thomas, where if you say, God forbid Cam might not be on the team for long, how could you doubt him? It's all the coaching staff, or sometimes it's the player.
James Harden is who I would think of now that went to another team in the Rockets. And now he was good in Oklahoma City, obviously. But then when he went to Houston, he just, took himself to the next level of all NBA, all time great former player and former net now. But
the one time he didn't request a trade from OKC to Houston, ever since then, it's like every year and a half.
Craziness. And that's so frustrating too, I think, as basketball fans. And we're all in the moment of like, we see these tweets and we hear James Harden wants out. And now here we are, what, like a week later, and nothing, diddly poo. We're still just waiting and trying to figure out what is going to happen. And I think that's what's really now what's going on where with this NBA free agency is there's this whole like kind of waiting game. In particular, the Dame Lillard one, which is the big one. I think inevitably he does get to Miami, but it's all the pieces in between that get him there. We're just kind of waiting.
Yeah, and it really freezes up a lot of the league too. I mean, I feel like the Dame and the Harden thing are almost two different, and we could talk about both. But Dame really, he's a good player, and he hasn't. I think Harden's hit that peak, while Dame still has a couple of good years in him for sure. But it just shows that, like, when a superstar says, "Here's where I want to go," they often get what they want.
Yeah.
It took him longer to get to Phoenix than maybe he would have preferred, but he got there. And the Dame to the Nets angle there is really interesting. But from everything I've read, it seems like he wants Miami bad, and like that's what's going to happen one way or another.
Was he full of shit when he was like, the Nets thing and the Mikal Bridges thing? I mean, it must have been all bullshit because I mean, I respect Dame in a lot of ways because he tried his best. Well, congrats.
Yeah.
But he knows going to the Nets, he's not winning a championship. I mean, maybe if the Nets were to do something else in the future, but with the current constructed roster, he's basically Portland in the East, and he knows that. He can spin it all he wants about super teams and super this, but he knows he goes to Miami with Bam and Jimmy B, that he's got an actual chance to win a championship. And I wouldn't fault him for it, but let's not, kind of lie about it.
No, and when he said that in the first place about super teams, I was like, he said something about multiple all-stars, and I'm like, was Jimmy Butler technically an all-star or an all-NBA player at this time? And Bam, and it feels like he really does like Mikal. I don't think that part is fake.
Sure.
But when you're trading a franchise player like a Dame Lillard, and this is where I think, me and you talked about this offline a lot. Dame is, if you could get Dame for like a couple picks and like some cap filler, of course you do it, even with the contract and even with the new CBA that everyone is talking about. But for Portland to trade this type of guy, they want to get as much as they can, and they're going to make it as difficult as possible, right? And so Miami's package is not going to be that great. And it's only because I think sheer force of he's pulling out all the stops, talking to Shams once a day, complaining to other reporters who are quite good. And if the Nets make the trade for Dame, they'd have nothing left or very little left to kind of go for that superstar. The one thing that Marks did right with KD and Kyrie, he got them in free agency. So the hard move was the move where we paid a lot of draft capital and we're going to pay for it a little bit. But the fact that we could trade KD and Kyrie, and now we're in a draft pick surplus.
The Nets don't have a backup point guard. The Knicks don't have a backup power forward. I think that's both fan bases' frustration right now is the Nets just go in with Spencer Dinwiddie and I think that's a love-hate relationship there on many ways. And then the Knicks have Julius Randle and no one to back up. I, I would honestly say with these two GMs, don't be shocked if either team doesn't fill the void, and it doesn't happen. I wouldn't be shocked on either direction with the way these two teams are managed.
Oh yeah, I mean, we just saw right before we started recording Mo Bamba, who Nets
Oh my
fans
God.
like have like an obsession with random bench players who aren't that good because Mo
Yeah,
Bamba was cut from the Lakers, and I feel like the Lakers had a pretty good offseason. If he was that great, he'd be
of
back
course.
there.
Well,
And it's like, why aren't we getting Mo Bamba? That's the guy. But yeah, Sean Marks for some reason hasn't found someone who could rebound well. I mean, since Jared Allen, maybe because Claxton's not even that great of a rebounder.
Ed Davis was like his best off-season pickup. I mean, but Ed had his limitations, but like Ed off the bench. And I'm telling you, if he wasn't hurt in some of those Sixer games in 2019, they're winning some of those. But Ed Davis off the bench was a great rebounder. But since then, man, like DeAndre Jordan disaster, um, Jared Allen obviously then dealt away. There just has not been. And then Andre Drummond there had moments, but he was
Yeah.
so bad in the playoffs versus the Celtics that the Blake Griffin had to come in the
No.
very end finally. But that all was a mess, man. There's just been so much mess with both of these teams, and in particular, unfortunately, last year with the Nets. And you see like KD still interacting with Net fans on Twitter. Did he
Yeah.
do that? Did he do that with Warrior fans and Thunder fans? Did he do that as much?
I think so, honestly. I remember the Thunder fans in particular. He'd be like, "Why are you uh, getting at me on a particular thing?" One thing I wanted to bring up because I think it is a good point to bring up the Tyler Hero kind of
Yes.
rumor that's been out there. Because one thing I guess I push back with all the Nets issues right now, we're kind of in talent acquisition mode, right? Getting as many talented people as we can and not necessarily filling in, you know, would it be better to have a better Spencer like point guard than Spencer Dinwiddie? Yeah. But if you get an opportunity to add someone like a Tyler Hero, I think you got to do it,
Yeah.
right? I think if it's not going to cost you too much, if it's a pick and like a player, you don't get opportunities like this to be the Cleveland, picking up Jared Allen for free that often. So curious what you think, Mike. Hero is a little bit controversial, I'd say.
Two parts to it. One, I'm all for adding Tyler Hero. Um, Nets need offensive firepower. They
Yeah,
need guys that can score. They need basketball players. They don't have anybody on this team right now besides Bridges where you feel they don't have enough talent scoring. Yes, they have some good defensive players, but we saw it in the Sixer series. I mean, they couldn't do shit at times. They went into such funks where they couldn't score the basketball. Now, when the defense was ripping and everything was going well, they did have some solid moments, but they need a guy that you can give the ball, help come off screens, good in transition, and score baskets. And I'm for all for Tyler Hero. And then I know the next thing I'll ask, but his contract. Yeah, I understand. He makes a lot of money. I get that. But that doesn't mean that, first of all, that he's here forever. I'm all about like let's start building the foundation and then see what happens down the road, like the Heat did. They have Tyler Hero. They got to a point where they could flip him
right.
theoretically for Damian Lillard. Now, I'm not saying that's exactly what the Nets will do, but adding and collecting talent of guys that are on the same timeline as the Nets. And that's where I'll agree with you a lot about the Dame stuff, where Dame, is going to be his 33 or whatnot.
Yeah,
Hero's 10 years younger. So for him, he fits more of the Nick Claxton, Cam Johnson, Mikal Bridges in that mold of that young to mid 20-year-old that you can build with and get better. I'm all about that. And yes, he makes a lot of money. Everybody makes a lot of money. You have to get away from that. This is different. Like everybody's like, you gave Cam Johnson 4 years, 108. I would have given him 104, but then stopped. I mean, unless you're the cap that well, explain to me the difference. There's just a lot of money given out. That's just the way it is, man. Unless you want to just go all void and have nobody on your team with no draft picks, there's no other way to do it. And I'll spin it back to you then, Corey. This idea that the Nets have to give up Ben Simmons to make it happen, I'd be weary of giving up Ben right now. And if you have to do it for Hero, I'll do it. But I wouldn't just trade Ben to trade Ben. To me, there's no benefit of it.
yeah,
He's so bad right now in his trade value. He had such a bad finish. at least take a chance to see if he can return. I don't think he will. He probably won't. But if you can get a Ben Simmons right now who's at his lowest point, you wait to trade him until he starts playing well again. Or
Yeah.
what's the difference? Like either way, you're gonna have to absorb the cap back. So unless it's Herro, that's one thing. Other than that, I'm keeping Ben Simmons and I'm seeing what I got in him.
So I think I'm kind of on the middle ground on the Simmons thing because I've talked to a lot of people too about the goal of the Nets this offseason, and this is a bit cap wonky, but they want to stay under the luxury tax to avoid this thing called the repeater tax, which means that they're going to have to pay a shit ton of money in the future when they're actually competing for a championship. They're under it right now. They can get Herro and basically stay under it by trading Dorian Finney-Smith or Dinwiddie or potentially Ben. Point is with Ben particularly, there is that risk, right? That we were talking about with Toppin before. Ben goes on to rebound somewhere else and look pretty good. I'm willing to give Simmons basically about 6 months because he'll be at 18 months from his surgery. If Ben isn't showing by the trade deadline that type of improvement that you'd see in like Michael Porter Jr., for example, then I think his time is up. And then I think you got to get rid of him. He has everything that we talked about before that the Nets need in terms of size, rebounding, point guard that's not Dinwiddie.
Yeah.
But do you trust him, right? Like I can't honestly come on your great show and say, I want Ben Simmons in the starting five. I trust Dinwiddie at this point more because he's shown it.
Oh yeah.
But the Nets aren't competing for a championship next year. So from like a GM standpoint, Dorian Finney-Smith is not going to be with the team forever. Neither is Royce O'Neal or Spencer. Maybe it's better to get off of them and get younger. And then if we have to use a pick next year to get rid of Ben, to bring in a Javonte Murray or a, any other type of point guard superstar, then at least you're at that point and But I'm losing my patience with him, I'll say. I think there's some people who are way too lenient and he has to show us something. I will say also the Nets probably have more info than us because they see him on a week-to-week basis. And a lot of times when they put stuff out there saying, he's trying really hard or he's almost ready, I don't know if you can trust it.
No, not at all. And don't get me wrong. If I was a betting man, I'd say he's not going to be very good or he's not going to play.
Yeah.
But if he's at an all-time low value right now, you're just trading him to trade him. You're getting nothing back. I rather take a risk on seeing if he can perform than whatever will be back in that deal. Now, it's not if he has, 5 years on this contract, it's a little different, but he's got the 2 years. I'd be willing to take the risk of just having him there and see what happens. And if it fails, it fails. But as opposed to just dealing him to deal him, because he's at the all-time low value when you want to get him his cap off the books and you get somebody expiring. So it's one less year of that contract. I'd rather take the risk on it, man. I really would. And trust me, I've seen enough net games and been involved in this shit long enough to know he probably won't be good. But at least take the chance and see what happens. I'm all for that and giving it one more year.
Yeah, I think we're close to the end on the Simmons experiment for better or worse, but I do think we'll see. I want to see this Herro deal go down. Last thing I'll say on it, I think there's a bunch of Net fans on Nets Twitter and Spaces who are like, Sean Marks, why aren't you getting this trade done? And I think a lot of this is really out of the Nets' hands. I think ultimately Portland is pretty pissed about the whole situation, which is really a lot of their fault because they should have traded Dame before it got to this point. But I don't think Sean Marks is going to kill the deal over Ben Simmons not being included if he wanted to get rid of him. I think it's more likely that like Portland wants more out of Miami and they're frustrated that Miami has like 2 draft picks and like not much.
Sorry to interrupt you there. Just getting excited for this next question. If has listening to this podcast and getting to know Nick Central on Twitter made you dislike the Knicks more than you did say before this time?
I think he's more of a rational Knick fan than like a lot of Knick fans I've dealt with. Yeah, I know. It's crazy to say. I have like a Knicks origin like hate story as well. If you want to hear it, I can.
Yes. Yeah.
Back in 2003, I was at an unnamed summer camp in New York. And I was the only Net fan. And basically there was a whole cabin full of Knick fans. All summer they were talking about how Vince Carter was going to be traded to the Knicks. When Kenyon Martin left the Nets, because at the time the owner, Bruce Ratner, wouldn't pay to keep him. Yeah. He put up essentially newspaper clippings because at camp back in the day you didn't have cell phones. of just Kmart leaving the Nets for Denver. And
Mm.
so after that summer, I was like, these Knicks fans are real bad. And so when the Nets got Vince Carter, I was like, you know what? I'll just hate them for 20 years. So anyway, Alex is a lot more rational. And I'd say a lot of the stuff you guys talk about Knicks fans just being overly attached to their own players, I'd say, or overrating their chances pretty much every season, is all factual. So I like to see him get into it over like Tibbs. I think some people just think every move the Knicks make is a great one.
No, Alex is very critical of the Knicks, and it makes me think maybe I'm not critical enough of the Nets. I would say he's definitely more critical of the Knicks than I am of the Nets. I'm not saying more passionate for them to win. That's a different conversation. But he's definitely more critical, and I've definitely been a little more, lenient. He's definitely seen some weird shit with the Knick organization. If Alex was here
Yeah.
right now, what is there one thing? Twitter's one thing, and DMs and tweets, but text. If you could see him on this podcast and he was here, is there one thing you'd want to ask him?
Oh, that's a good question. Well, I mean, the joking question would be like, how pissed are you about Obi Toppin? But I guess like if he had truth serum, it would be, do you really think that RJ Barrett is that good? Because it's the one thing that I don't get, and I think it's the new generation of like Knick fans having to believe that they have some homegrown talent. But the amount of texts I get saying, you see what Zion did, you see what Ja Morant did, RJ Barrett is the best pick of that draft. And forget about all the off-court stuff, but they really want RJ Barrett to succeed. It's almost like delusional. I'm like, he's a fine player, but what's with the Kool-Aid drinking?
Yeah, and the other part of it too is like I would trade RJ Barrett for Zion and or Ja Morant in a heartbeat, even though what both of those two guys have gone through in different ways in Zion and Ja, you make those trades and you don't even think twice because of the upside and the potential of how great they are and how superstarred they are. It's not even a question. And to me, if that's your answer, and Alex knows deep down that he would say that too, he would make those trades, you do it. But I understand, like you said, if there's not as much of the homegrown, loving your guy, and he does love RJ. I'll give him that. I mean, we have had some battles. And we know how to stir each other too. I'll say that.
Do you think our version of that is Nick Claxton, where like it's the type of person where if you took Nick Claxton and you put him on the Clippers, right? Would people be as passionate about it? Because RJ, I feel like if you put RJ on like the Grizzlies or something, people would be like, he's a good player. No one would say he's not talented, or same with like Flax. But I think there is the homegrown element of it. I had a Nick fan today tell me the Raptors would be lucky to trade OG Anunoby for RJ. And I'm like, I don't think the Raptors are calling up the Knicks being like, we really need RJ Barrett.
Well, I'd also say, one major difference in your comparison, and I think it's fair about like Nick and the Clips, is and I believe RJ and Clax are in the same draft, is RJ Barrett was drafted 28 picks higher.
Yeah.
So the expectation level, right or wrong, is always going to be there. If you're a top 3 pick, you're going to be expected to have more in your career. The fact that I could say to you, and I know your answer, Corey, would you trade Nick Claxton for RJ Barrett? You would say absolutely not. But RJ Barrett was, drafted 28 picks higher than Nick Claxton. So that draft status does make a difference on this stuff.
I think where you start to get into it, and this is one topic I definitely want to touch on. I was asking my Nick future in-laws about Embiid trades, and I was saying because I think the Knicks have a really good shot at him, and I'm like, so what do you think? What Knick players would you trade for Embiid? And Toppin's now gone, and so they were like, well, we give them Grimes and Mitch Robinson and a couple picks, but not RJ.
Right.
And I was like, seriously, come on.
All right. So, is it going to be tough? Wait. Who's the Knick fan? Say this again.
This is my future. It's my sister's fiance's siblings. We have a nice group chat.
Okay. And is it annoying having them in your life then as Knick fans?
The group chat is called Julius after Julius Randle. And so I get their exuberance all the time, hot takes on Dante DiVincenzo. One of the siblings is a bit more rational. The other one, just every move that Nick makes, GM makes is amazing. And so they also they'll slam on the Nets when KD and Kyrie were traded.
Oh yeah.
Oh, just tons of shit dropped on hour upon hour, and it's annoying. But there's so many Knick fans. I feel like as a Net fan, you have to learn how to navigate Knick fans.
Yeah.
And again, before this pod, I was asking about Obi Toppin, and all unhappy about the trade, all are against it. But of course, the Knick offseason is an 8 out of 10, and all they did is sign Dante DiVincenzo.
Yeah, I know. It's like it's a good fit. I mean, it makes sense. I like him as a player. He'll definitely help. He's an upgrade from what they had, with like an Evan Fournier and all of that from an offensive
They still
punch.
have
So,
Evan Fournier too.
well, yeah, but I guess he's still technically there, and he is definitely eating up a lot of that salary cap. He is eating up a ton of it. But it's an improvement for the Knicks, and expectations for the Knicks next season.
They're
Obviously surpassed them, so they'll have expectations.
They're one move away, and that's why I also asked him before coming on, would you trade for an Embiid? And the Nick Homerism comes out in the sense of we only want to trade Grimes and Mitchell Robinson and a couple picks for Embiid. When you know that someone of that caliber, just like I was talking to a Net fan today about Luka, it's like you're giving up every pick you have, and the other team is choosing for you, especially in your own division. I can't think of the last time. Embiid has been linked with the Knicks and I think the Lakers. And so I mean, I don't see Morey doing it that soon, but I wouldn't count the Knicks out. These signings, they're right where they need to be to make a big move like this.
You know what happens if Joel Embiid's traded to the Knicks? There's a lot of emergency podcasts. A lot of Knick fans. That's what in this one too, this podcast. But that's what happened. You'd have all these emergency podcasts that would just keep flying out.
I mean, Brunson would be pretty good, though. I mean, just
of course they would. Corey, don't you don't think about that. Of course they would be pretty good together. Jalen Brunson's Kyrie Irving skill, but without all the shit that kind of right or wrong is kind of swirling. I mean, that's how good Jalen was last year.
I feel like literally
better.
Liam Rose. All Liam Rose did is once the Villanova thing worked out once, he's like Josh Hart, gotta grab him. Up another Villanova free agent, gotta grab him. It's like now they're like, is Mikal going to be traded to the Knicks? I'm like, no, Knick fans, stay away.
Yeah, no, he's probably, Leon Rose is looking at that championship team going, who else was on that roster? Let's just bring them all in. I don't even know who the fuck this guy is. He's playing in Lithuania, but why not? Let's make a move for it. Do you, Corey, do you enjoy net spaces?
Man, this is it's a really, I think I enjoy speaking on them, but it depends who's running them. There's been some really messed up shit in these net spaces. And they just get really negative. I don't know. For listeners who aren't familiar with spaces, it's this Twitter thing where kind of I guess a podcast, right? You talk a radio show. And some of these net fans, I think everyone wants to pretend to be an insider or something. And I don't know, Mike, you're on a bunch of them and speak too. It's just everything is really pessimistic.
I always give you shit when I see you on there because that's the only you're one of there's a couple people when they go on them, it'll trigger me that one's happening. And then I'm always looking at it. Yeah, they're drama filled. I don't think that's just a Nets Twitter thing. I'm sure our Net Spaces thing. I'm sure it's all of them, but I mean they can get feisty. Oh boy, they can get sure as hell feisty.
Yeah, I mean, especially when Kyrie and KD were on the team, and mostly Kyrie, I'd say they're just people who stand out more than anything. If you spoke one bad word about it, just
no.
Maybe the guy should play a couple of games if you're paying them, hundreds, or millions of dollars a season, and you get slammed, or hating on Sean Marks for every move, or not signing Mo Bamba. But I think it's still in good fun, right?
Yes.
People are nice enough, and there's I'm not going to make so many Net fans jokes, but it's good to find other Net fans, and us connecting on Twitter. I have a good friend Justin who I met through Nets Twitter, and then we're actual friends and go to breweries and stuff like that. So it's not all bad, but again, everyone thinks they could be GM, and every good player is just available for not your best, and you're going to fleece another team every single time.
Yeah, no, it's true. I respect you for it. I think that's a very solid answer. I'm sure if Alex was here, he'd agree with that. I've never been able to get Alex to speak on a Knicks Spaces. He's never done it once, and I push for him to do it. I try all the time. He just will not. He'll listen, but I can't get him to speak. So I need you to advocate and push to get Alex on a Spaces for me, if you don't mind.
Yeah, no, for sure. And I have a question for you, I guess, given your experience of spending so much time with Nick fans uh,
Mm-hmm.
and Net fans, what would you say after doing all these bad weather fans pods? How would you describe the main difference between a Net and a Nick fan? Because I feel like you've interacted with enough
Yeah.
different ones.
Yeah, honestly, they're the same. I think they're the same. Passionate about their team, hate the other one. Um, I think it's just it comes from a lot of let me say this on the modern day fact of it. I think Net fans definitely got cocky when they signed Kyrie and KD, which they should feel good about. That was a big day for them. It didn't work out. Obviously, it didn't work out. But at the same time, they're allowed to be proud in the moment and fight back at the Knick fan. I think the Knick fan wasn't used to it, wasn't used to having another fan base in town kind of annoy them. And so I totally understand why they got annoyed. I can see why a Net fan would get annoyed back. But at the end of the day, like, you know, we're all great fans who love our teams. You know, Alex is a Knick fan. I'm a Net fan. We both like the Mets. So it just happenstance. There's just less Net fans because they were less popular. But honestly, when it boils down to it, um, they're pretty much the same. I would say though, just from experience, typically the Knick fan on a general sense won't know as much overall. And I think that's because they probably were wrapped up in their own world and didn't remember that there were other teams outside of Madison Square Garden. So overall, and Alex always likes this, and I always give shit to Alex for this story. But I remember going to a Knicks game at the Garden. I think it was a game where Porzingis got hurt, and I remember the Knick fans in front of me saying like, "We got to bring Latrell Sprewell as the coach," and giving me this whole rationale, and I was just like, what a fan base. So yeah, I mean the Net fan has a little better smarts.
Yeah, no, thanks for having me on. That's
Yeah, no, happy to do it. But Corey, in all seriousness, thanks for coming on Bad Weather Fans. What episode was this? I said 179. There's been a bunch of these. For people that want to hear more of your Net opinions, is there a place you like to give them?
Yeah, so you can follow me, Corey B. Cantor, on Twitter. I apparently now have a Threads, which is blowing up all of social media.
Yes.
So you can find me there, and I talk a lot about electric cars, my day job. But it's evening and Woj bombs, all for the Nets. So hopefully by your next episode we have some good Nets news.
Yeah, we'll see. And hopefully nothing happened during this, or else we'll have to re-record it. And I'm not in the mood to do that. Although I would. Alex and I, there was only one time we had to re-record an episode. It was we had just had Kerry Kittles on, and then we went to talk Nets. And later that night, as we were wrapping up, Kyrie Irving went on Instagram Live to talk about how he wasn't playing. And I said, Alex, everything we just talked about is definitely old news. And we had to do the whole thing over. So that was the only time that has ever happened on Bad Weather Fans. But Corey, thank you again for coming on. Follow Corey on Twitter. He's a great Nets fan. Everybody listening, don't forget on Apple, give 5 stars, leave a comment. Same deal on Spotify. And if you want to see the video of this and see these amazing backgrounds that we put together on this podcast, because we are so professional, head over to Bad Weather Fans on YouTube. Great interviews on there from the past, including Richard Jefferson, Kerry Kittles, Ron Artest, Tracy McGrady, and I'm probably forgetting some other ones, but go check them out. And Bad Weather Fans, episode 179. One thing we didn't mention, Corey, we'll say it right here. Shout out to Joe Harris. I will say one of the stranger Net careers, from a no-name player to really part of the revitalization of the Nets and becoming a franchise that's respectable, to one of the best shooters in the league, to a guy then that missed every big shot in Nets history. If he hits one shot in particular versus the Bucks in overtime from the wing with the score 111-111, maybe you and I are wearing different t-shirts that say Net Championships during this podcast, but they didn't. So shout out to Joe. But good times. Corey, thanks for coming on the pod, man. Thanks for helping out on 179, and we'll talk to you later.
Thanks, Mike.